among legal scholars about Section 3 of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution and its disqualification or potential disqualification of Donald Trump. Originalist readings of the text present arguments on both sides, but you challenge the legitimacy of the debate itself, stressing that judges are actively making choices. Talk to me about what happens when justices on the Supreme Court assert that they're merely trying to follow the framers' intent.
Well, I think the main thing that originalism is doing now is it's sort of working as a rhetorical strategy that lets the justices deny responsibility for choices that they're making. So, the American people have strong views about the right of children to attend school safely versus the right to bear arms. And that's a trade-off that people might think, we should do some studies and figure out how we can balance these rights. But originalism, the justices say, takes that away from us because the choice was made in the past. And as judges, they're just following the law. They're enforcing the choices made by we the people and put in the Constitution. And the problem is history is complex. Constitutional provisions written hundreds of years ago without specific facts and circumstances of today in mind actually don't answer those questions. So the justices can look back at the historical record and they pick a side and then they pretend that's the only answer.
And then this is further complicated by the arguments some have made in this particular case about the 14th Amendment. Some argue that it's a stretch to compare January 6th rioters and what Donald Trump there did to insurrectionists who triggered the Civil War. Some argue that January 6th pales in comparison with the devastation unleashed by the Civil War and they shouldn't be compared. Your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that really misunderstands what happened on January 6th. So you didn't have hundreds of thousands of Americans killed, certainly, that's true. But that was not a protest. That was not people out there saying, we don't like what the government's doing, we wish it would act differently. That was people saying, we're going to force the government to do what we want, and we will kill you if you stand in our way, right? We will hang Mike Pence. And what they were trying to do, what they wanted the government to do, was illegally keep Donald Trump in power. So they're trying to take over the presidency. They're trying to take over the position of commander-in-chief of the U.S. Army, right? If that doesn't scare you, then nothing should.
Some people also make the argument that barring a leading contender from the ballot is somehow undemocratic and instead calls for defeating Donald Trump at the ballot box for the sake of unity and stability. Now, in your book, you note that putting unity ahead of justice is the sin that echoes through our America. Tell me what that means.
Well, so putting unity ahead of justice, and by that I basically mean unity among white Americans, is what America does frequently. And we say, we have to do this to move forward. We have to get the colonies together to fight the British. We have to get everyone to sign on to the Constitution. And in order to do that, we make compromises. We sacrifice other values. Most consistently, what we sacrifice is racial equality. So that's why you get the constitutional provisions that preserve and protect slavery. And that's why at the end of Reconstruction, you get white America turning its back on this ideal of racial equality. Because what brings whites together is racial hierarchy. It's white supremacy.
You've actually made this point that the Civil War didn't end the racial hierarchy in this country. And in fact, it persisted for another 100 years. You are an expert on the Reconstruction era and the subsequent redemption movement, which was a campaign by white supremacists to restore their power and to actually reverse civil and voting rights gains. And you have described January 6th and the post-January 6th insurrection as being part of a similar kind of redemption. You're sort of making the argument that there was a civil war, there was Reconstruction and the redemption, and we're sort of there again. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so you see this pattern in American history, that there are movements for equality. Americans believe in equality. That's one of the strands of our history. And equality movements make progress. Sometimes it comes through conflict and tragedy and great cost, which is the Civil War. And then there's a backlash, and that's redemption. So the Reconstruction governments are overthrown by military force. The U.S. Army doesn't interfere. Voting rights are taken away. The integrated schools are dismantled. A lot of the gains are undone. And then, you have to wait. And in that case, you wait almost 100 years. But the equality movement rises again. It's the second Reconstruction. the civil rights movement of the mid-20th century, the Warren Court, all of that. There's a backlash. Again, it's the new federalism. It's the Reagan Revolution. This is when originalism becomes popular as a constitutional theory of interpretation. And what we're seeing now, I think, is the same thing, sort of in microcosm. So we had the Black Lives Matter protests, the George Floyd protests. Everyone was talking about a racial reckoning. People's attitudes are changing. And we made some progress in terms of equality. What we're seeing now is a backlash. The attack on DEI is part of that. The ouster of Claudine Gay is part of that. And January 6th, and the argument that, elections are only legitimate, or we only respect electoral results if we win, that's sort of the Trump view. That's exactly what the redemptionists were saying.
Kermit Roosevelt III, this is a crucial and important argument that you make, and you've written it, and it was written before we were in the situation that we're in right now. So we really appreciate that. I truly hope maybe we can sneak some of the copies of your book to the Supreme Court so everybody realizes what their actual responsibility is in the coming days and weeks. We are honored to have you on the show. Thank you for being with us. Kermit Roosevelt III is a professor at the University of Pennsylvania, Carey Law School, the author of the book, The Nation That Never Was, which is uniquely relevant to the moment in which we exist right now.